And welcome everybody here in the what world does the Babadook come from? Is it, would I say, the Phantom Zone?
No, you're probably better off saying Adelaide, Australia, mate, where it was filmed.
Welcome everybody to the Sunday movie talks with me and Stevie J. Today is my turn at the docket, and to give you guys a little bit of context before we get into this review, I actually pitched this to Stevie. I go, Stevie, let's go international. Let's be a little inclusive, and you know how we love to be inclusive on our channels. So I was like,
Got to
let's not
diversify.
we diversify, let's not just do horror movies, but let's do the best Australian horror films and have you guys pick them because I don't know if you guys knew, but Stevie J is Australian. So I thought he might have some pretty good insights on the topic. I mean, I visited there, but I don't know much else about it. So, you know what, Stevie, for this, I'm going to pass the baton on to you. I'm going to let you introduce our movie and give us some fun facts about it. And then, any little fun tidbits you might have about Australia.
No worries, mate. Well, yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me back again. It's always good to be on Sunday Movie Talk. And yes, The Babadook. Awesome film. And it was directed by Jennifer Kent, and this was her debut. And so, interestingly for her and for this film, the film was nominated and won, this is for the Australian Awards, won Best Direction and Best Screenplay. So she won some awards for her very first film, which is good to see. It goes for about an hour and a half. It's a psychological thriller/horror film. Now, something very interesting about this is the budget. The budget for this movie was $2 million. So to put that into some kind
Wow.
of perspective, Terminator Dark Fate had a $185 million budget. So to put that into some kind of budget perspective, this movie, The Babadook, had $2 million budget, and it made $10 million at the box office. And so, with at least what I'm going to say about this movie today, you will be probably surprised at that it only cost $2 million and that it only made $10 million at the movies. Now, it was produced by Screen Australia, which is one of the bigger production companies in Australia, and it was funded by the actual state government in Adelaide, which is a city in Australia, and that's where the film was actually shot as well for the majority of the film. And they actually didn't have any houses that looked like the film, the one we saw in the film in Adelaide. There's no actual houses like that. So they actually built that house from scratch just for this movie. And so I suppose something else interesting about this is that Jennifer Kent, when she was directing this, she knew that she had Noah Wiseman there, the young boy who plays Samuel. And she was very aware of the scare factor of this film for such a young kid. And so when she got him to come on board, she didn't actually sit him down with everybody else and do a script reading because she didn't want to scare him. So what she did was she sat with him and the kid's mum, and they actually just had a bit of a chat about the story from a more light-hearted, kid-friendly version. So more like an old nursery rhyme type situation. So anyways, now it was rated fairly well on Redundant Tomatoes, but we might get into that later. And that's the basic summary of this 2014 Australian film that I really enjoyed. Over to you, Zod.
And here's the thing about this too. I like to say welcome, Jamie Vick. Welcome, Thomas. Good to have you. Thomas is finally here to troll me because I'm talking about something different. So besides Star Wars. So yeah, it's good. It's good to have you guys. Here's the interesting thing that I find interesting when dealing with horror, and I wanted to talk about this before we got into like the nuts and bolts of the different things we talk about, is a lot of people, and I'm a huge horror fan, and I like all kinds of horror movies, but a lot of people see, especially critics, and we're talking about before 2015, before the big shill. I'm gonna call it, of 2000. Critics have hated horror movies since like the fucking 80s. I don't know what it is about horror in particular. They don't like the horror genre. They never have. So even giving a horror movie a bad rating is in their wheelhouse because they consider them mindless gore and blood and no real artistic expression. I remember one critic saying, and to an extent, they are correct. So as horror has evolved and changed, I felt like the directors have gotten better at not just putting in blood, guts, and gore, but more of a study or some kind of theme in it. Because I feel like this is where you could have political and sociology in your movies. Horror is an excellent study. It's definitely when you're put in these fantastic situations, it does justify why people act the way that they do. So I always thought, like, if you were to put politics or something into something, horror is the perfect outlet because most movies are what? The breakdown of a person, the breakdown of society, things like that. So it's great to see that a movie like this exists because when you watch this film isn't actually about a monster, even though you could see my cool icon here in the background. I think it's more of the monster that is haunting these people. And I mean, we'll get into the spoilers. So if you haven't seen this, sorry. But I mean, this deals more with the demons that you face physical, and one just happened to manifest itself, you know, in this house. But it's more of a psychological
Yeah,
monster
and
she's dealing with.
and look, I probably in my excitement about talking about this Aussie film, I probably glazed over the plot if people haven't actually seen this or heard of it before. So the basic premise of the Babadook is there's this mum played by Essie Davis. Her name's Amelia. She's got a son, Samuel, who's 7 years old. Now, when he was born, on the day that Samuel was born, the young kid, her husband and his dad was killed in a car accident driving on the way to the hospital to give birth. So they've both been dealing with this trauma for the last 7 years, and it's really about how both of them are dealing with that. Now, Samuel starts off, he's not a very well-behaved child. She's really struggling to contain him and keep him socially, well-adjusted and all these sorts of things. She's really just struggling as a single mum. And the premise of this film is basically her dealing with her grief and the way that the relationship between the son and the mum devolves into something completely different throughout. And the Babadook, where the Babadook comes in, is really, it is a monster in the film, but it's really a representation of her grief. And it's bloody scary. So if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking it out. But that's basically the premise or the overall summary of the plot.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, right there, that is already an intriguing setup. And here's the thing that threw people off about this movie, why I brought up the whole horror aspect, is when people were watching this, I think they were expecting like, a big bad, like a Jason
Yeah.
or a Freddy or something like that. But this was more of a human level thing. And don't get me wrong, there is a big bad. I mean, it's kind of confusing at times. You really have to watch, but the way that she films this is quite brilliant because while the
Mm-hmm.
monster is there, while it's doing physical things, there's also the monster is the representation of everything that they've been holding back, that she hasn't been talking about, that she hasn't dealt with herself. And you see this with the interactions with like family members and things like that. And I think to me, this is the most brilliant type of horror because it's not just focused on killing and blood and gore and things like that. I mean, some truly terrifying things are the real life things that you go through. The real life tragedies are horrific. And I think that's something I pulled out of this movie too, that the director is saying that it's not just these big scary monsters that are horrifying, but sometimes it's the little things in life. It's the loss of a loved one. It's being a single mother. It's dealing with tragedy and being a single mother, you know, and trying to hold
Yep.
yourself and someone together. I mean, there's a lot of powerful themes in this. So let's
Oh,
jump into
absolutely.
let's just jump
Absolutely.
right into it. Because we kind of gave you guys an overview and the themes of things. Let's hit up the acting first, and let me just get you to what do you think
Awesome.
of the acting? He didn't even let
Well,
me. Yeah, go ahead.
I tell you what,
Uh,
mate. I tell you what. I watched this. I watched this with the missus, and she's not a big fan of these kind of films and everything like that. So, but at the end of it, she wasn't that thrilled with the film just because it's not her genre. But I said to her, well, you've at least got to give me some comment about the acting. And she said, oh yeah, she was brilliant. So I'm talking about Essie Davis, right, who played Amelia, which is the mum. Now, she she's not a big Hollywood star or anything like that. She has been in some films you probably wouldn't think that she was in, though. She was in Matrix Reloaded, Matrix Revolutions, and Assassin's Creed as well. But I digress. Her acting in this was utterly brilliant. She portrayed the divulsion of this character into something completely different than what it was in the beginning, or what she was in the beginning. That I was truly impressed. Now, she also had what a lot of actors don't have, which is she had restraint in her performance. Now, it sounds strange me saying that, given that she does do a lot of screaming and a lot of yelling and stuff towards the later part of this film, but she has a lot of restraint, and a lot of the communication that happens with the audience is from her eyes and from her facial expression. And I tell you what, she scared the bejesus out of me in some of those scenes. And I was truly on the edge of my seat with her acting in this. And look, Noah Wiseman as well. He was the kid. He was very good playing Samuel. He was a very, very believable character in both, again, the beginning and towards the end. He was doing a very, very good job. But really, the star of this movie is Essie Davis, because it's really about her. The whole thing is about her, really, and her relationships with everybody else, and the relationship with her grief. And the direction of this was so good. I cannot stress that enough. So we're on acting at the moment, but part of that is the direction too. And I used the word restraint before. You don't often get restraint in a horror film. You really don't. And the way that this was pieced together, as far as direction goes, we'll talk more about that later. But Essie Davis was absolutely fantastic.
oh, yes, yes, I do agree. And before I give my thoughts on the acting, I'm just gonna say, Curtis YZ, I did turn off the vibrate feature on my phone. I apologize. My mom just got done with some surgery. She donated her kidney. She's okay. The operation was a success, but I've been like keeping my phone on because I text back and forth to make sure she's all right. But yeah, and said that horror is not his thing, but the concept sounds good. And look, I'd like to stretch. I'm glad he brought that up. This to me doesn't really fall in the realm of horror as much as more psychological thriller. There is horror elements, especially the latter half of the film, but I'd say it's more psychological, and it's really a thought piece. And I'm swinging this back around to acting because the way it's acting, Stevie, I know exactly what you mean by restraint, and I could give some good examples here. Like if you watch, say, your classics, Michael Myers, and any of them, like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Jason, all of these, they're good, but not because necessarily of the acting. Taking out Jamie Lee Curtis, she became the Scream Queen after that. But I mean, the people around them are terrible. These people are disposable, simply there to die.
Yeah.
This is different because it's virtually just two people acting this out for a good majority of the film. And so it hinges on them building the tension. And the great thing, like you said, you see the restraint when she doesn't get mad about things. It's see, when she goes all out, it's more of the middle to the end of the movie. but there was buildup, and that's where you're talking about the restraint. You see her not get mad about things, hold everything inside, and that is really talented acting because if you're watching closely like we do, you could see it on her face and you can see the cracks showing, but she's still barely holding it together. So when she has those outbursts, they're more impactful, they're more meaningful because she's not screaming throughout the whole thing. So when she's screaming, when she's yelling, like I hadn't seen this movie in a while, right? But that part where she starts cursing at the kid, man, that shift got me because up to this point, she hadn't used any language. She hadn't even touched him, right? But the spirit is starting to take control of her, whatever, and she just turns around and says like something like, "I wish you were never born" or some shit. I was like, "Whoa!"
Well, I think the first time, yeah, I agree, mate. I agree, and I think the first time she says something like that is she hasn't been sleeping because by this point the Babadooks come and she's really, she's basically shit scared and she's she's trying to stay awake, and obviously sleep deprivation causes more problems, but she lies down in her bed, and I know what you're talking about. She lies down in her bed, and Samuel walks in, and by this point his character is starting to shift as well from being that less annoying, less hyperactive, troublesome kid into being more of what you would call, I'm using inverted commas here, a normal kid. And he comes into her room when she's about to go to sleep and starts saying that he's hungry because he hasn't eaten. There was nothing in the fridge. And she turns around to him and like really aggressively tells him if he's hungry to go and eat shit. So
Yeah.
that was, and it was like, in that point, it was like, damn, what did she just say? After, where her character has been leading up to that. But, it's a good point that you bring up about the way that it was built up to, with the progression of her character over the film, which made it really, really believable as well.
Yeah, and you know what? While we're on acting too, we can't discredit the kid. Child actors are really hard to come by because you have two, at least to me, you have two types. You have the kids who you can clearly tell don't know what they're doing, and maybe the direction is bad for their character or whatever else, but they're not that great. And then you have phenomenal child actors who just have that natural kind of instinct for it, or they're given great direction, or like you said, the director is good with them. They're hands on, which was clear by your story, the way she chose to handle it. And this kid gives one of the best performances I've seen in years from a child actor, like Macaulay Culkin level. Because remember that movie, The Good Son? Like,
Oh, I love that movie.
oh yeah, that movie fucked up Macaulay Culkin for till now. I mean,
Yeah, but
well,
it was creepy. It was creepy as, but it was awesome.
but yeah, when you look at that, he gives that kind of a performance in this film where
Hmm.
he it's hard as a kid to show a kid progressing because as adults we find it hard to take kids seriously, right? Even though we know they mature or whatever else, but it's hard to see it on screen like that. You like, oh, that kid needs his ass whooped or something like that, but
Yeah.
when you bring it up, I can see the progression of his character from bratty to almost brave and heroic and being the
Yep.
one who's going to help the mother. And I think that is key. If these two aren't playing their roles and acting the way that they are, the whole movie falls apart.
Yeah, I agree, mate. And it really it really says something about the direction here. I just bring up a comment. Tommy Connolly says, "Hate child actors always the weak part of movies." LOL, just saying. Well, look, I would tend to agree with you, Thomas, but in this case, not in this case, because Noah Wiseman, who plays Samuel, very similarly to what I said about Essie Davis, he has a real shift in his character in this. And look, I'm not going to say it's necessarily all him because the direction was absolutely fantastic, and we'll get into that in a second. But he goes from being a certain type of character and believable in that to a different character in the end. And to be able to do that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially like Zod said, for a child actor. So direction was great, but the child also has to listen to the director and really be engaged in what they're doing on the screen as well. So I think he did a really good job at that. I haven't seen him in a lot else, but he was very, very good in this. But I don't know if that's a good enough segue to start talking a bit about the direction in this, because wow, I was super, super impressed with the direction.
Yeah, we're going to hit the direction, but first I want to say, Curtis, that is an excellent example. Logan, in my mind, is a masterpiece. I don't know. LB said something about X2 being better. I would have to. That would be a strong discussion. I would love to actually be in on that discussion, because I think X2 and Logan would be a good head-to-head battle. Who's the best there? Because they're both good in their own rights. But Logan, acting-wise, yeah, you have the same situation. Another child actor who has to sell a part with a great actor. I mean, phenomenal, and Hugh Jackman, probably the best he's ever been in the role. Yeah, for her to bounce off of him like that, and for them to see like a couple, absolutely, I agree. That was one of the great ones. But let's head on over and change directions. Yeah.
Nice
My,
segue. Nice segue.
thank you. My segues are getting better. Direction is important, right? Because without having good direction in a film, you can have the greatest acting, the best scenes, but like you'll have people who are standing in the wrong places, shots that are being wasted, and things like that. In case you guys, in case anyone is curious about what direction is, so let's break this down. What to you, you've kind of touched on it, but what's the best examples in this film of really good direction?
Well, I think in this case we can talk about the writing and directing in the same vein, because Jennifer Kent was the writer and director for this. So for me, there was quite a lot that was good. Now, the first thing I would probably say is, and you don't often get this in horror films, right? There wasn't a single jump scare in the whole film. And gosh, I was like jumping up and down off the couch like Tom Cruise. No jump scares. Thank God for that. Finally. So that's one thing. And she kept the Babadook, so the monster of the film, who you would think would be the main part of it, who absolutely steals the show. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. She doesn't do that. You very rarely actually see a full view of the Babadook. And I believe that is how you build tension and an absolute scare factor into films, is by having that monster not visible all the time, or barely visible. It's very much in the shadows. It's very much in her mind a lot of the time. And so we get given the book, and that's an extremely creepy book to read. So we're told about the Babadook character through the book. And then when you start to see some of that play out in real life, the Babadook's still in the shadows and very creepy, very mysterious, which makes that, building that dramatic tension for the later scenes. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Now, the other thing that I want to mention as well is the shot framing. Wow, the shot framing for me in this. Now, you might not always pick this stuff up when you're watching things, but the shot framing in this was so important, and it was so clever. There was a lot of the shots were very wide shots to either capture both characters in it with a central focus in the middle. And it just painted the picture perfectly for that scene. And as a juxtapose to that, she also went from those wide shots with a couple of characters in it to a close-up shot of a single character, but at the right angle and with the character she was focusing on in the right height in the frame. So, and the right focus and everything to make it just really have that impact. And I can't stress enough how well, for a film with a $2 million budget, which is almost nothing, a $2 million budget, she was able to achieve what she achieved in this.
Yeah, and here's the thing that people don't understand. Like, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on budgets, but this movie and others that we've seen show that you can do movies, and it's almost this renaissance now where they're going back, thank God, to the old school way of doing things. Is you don't necessarily need CGI and fancy cameras and things like that to get the perfect shot. People have been shooting movies like this forever before we got into a technological renaissance. So it's good to see a director who just uses the art of camera to their advantage, right? Because you can get a couple of cameras for cheap or really good cameras, with some of that $2 million budget, and just get the right shot. You get the right shot, and you framed everything, and then you depend on the actors for those close-ups to sell the facial expressions and things like that. And that's what they do. Like you said, it's the combination of their acting and then her knowing when to do the close up, when to do the wide shot. And, not that we both shill for Joker, but, in Joker, they do almost virtually the same exact things, right? Those wide shots, the close-ups when they need, but there were a lot of wide shots where you see the audience and you see him and then kind of close up on him. Same exact techniques, and that made that movie great too. So I mean, you could see the layout for a really great movie, just bare bones, before you even start the story, the acting, the way they framed it all is just absolutely brilliant, like you said. And that's a sign of a really great, passionate director. And I'd just like to point out one thing too, for all of these Hollywood people that talk shit about these oppressed female filmmakers. Was she not a female? Because pretty sure she. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Where is her big budget?
Yeah, well, she says that she says she's female, so I guess she is. But but it just goes to show, I honestly could not care less about whether someone's female, male, an alien. I really don't care. But the first time I watched this film, I had no idea who the director was. But then after watching it, I was like, I want to find out who this director is, because damn, they were good. And it's Jennifer Kent, and it's not like I go, oh, she's female. Wow, yeah, I don't like it anymore. I just go, cool. What else? It just makes me go, okay, what else has Jennifer Kent directed? I might check that out as well. But okay, so great. We agree. This was shot really well, and it was very well directed. And I just got some other little key, tidbits of information for this film. So we mentioned there's a $2 million budget, which is, in the scheme of film, very, very low budget. So the other thing with this film that's really interesting is that she really wanted all of the film to be shot and just in camera. So in terms of post-production work that was done on it, very minimal. So there was some smoothing of the blending of the color scheme and the grading and all of that. That's pretty standard. But in terms of actually doing any effects in post-production, there really wasn't any. So where you see the Babadook and it's moving and it's doing all those creepy things, that was actually just stop motion and actual filming. And the smart use of the camera. It wasn't effects. It wasn't any kind of post-production effect. She actually achieved that in camera while shooting the film. So just to put that in perspective, like General Zod was saying, you don't need these big budgets. You don't need these big effects. And there's a place for that, of course. But it's so refreshing to see a film like this that's just really very plain and simple as far as story goes, but it's so damn interesting. And the way that it's shot keeps you so invested in it that you have to see what happens in the end.
Yeah, and that's the key right there. Jamie Vick said a $2 million budget. Wow, I know it's unheard of, Jamie Vick. You can actually just use a couple million and make a great film. But I mean, here's the other thing that strikes me about this is that, and we're gonna get to this in a second. I can't really bring up the ratings, because I'm on my phone, but I'm going to talk about Shell and Tomatoes. This is the first a horror movie where I've actually seen, for the most part, the critics in consensus with the audience, and the score is pretty decent. So that right there is kind of striking because it's a big deal when critics acknowledge horror movies. Because, like I said in the beginning of this, critics hate horror movies, don't know what it is, don't know why they do. I've heard some critics, like even my favorite, Cisco and Ebert. If you've been on the channel, you heard me talk about them. I show my ass off. I love them as a team. And even them, they were so tough on horror movies in particular. Like, you had to make the most like groundbreaking type of horror movie to impress them with it. And this movie impressed quite a few critics, you know, and I think it's because they went in a different direction. Rather than just make it about horror, she connects a lot of themes within the horror elements for it. So you can't just put this as a standard, jump scare fest. And that was another thing I want to comment on too. I love the Conjuring franchise, mainly one and two. I've seen all of them just because, I'm like PB, connected universes. But the fact that those movies, 90% of the movie is just jump scares. And I'm gonna kind of swing into the sound before I get to the rating stuff, but the sound is key in a horror movie. They purposely do a loud door slamming, uh, excessively loud music and stuff like that, and it'll be silent, and then you'll hear some kind of noise, and that's a jump scare in case anyone didn't know. And they use this tactic a lot, and I heard one critic put it the best. I believe it was Jeremy Johns. He said that when you have a horror movie that relies on jump scares, it deflates the actual real scare, because there's no built to tension. It's just like the whole point of a horror movie is to build the tension and then release. That's what terrifies us. With jump scares, they kind of put it in the middle of the film. So you build, and then boom, you're done. And then they got to rebuild again, and then another one. And so it really just takes the audience out of it. So then when you get at the end and you haven't really built up any of this like intensity you're supposed to fill, but not with this movie. This movie does not let up quite literally. Even at the end, in some parts, kind of startled me that I wasn't expecting when I first saw this film. It just keeps that tension just right and holds you there for the course of the runtime.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I think, yeah, you're spot on when you say music is such a big part of all films, but particularly horror films, because of what you talked about with the building of tension and that sort of thing. And I think, this film did a really good job. And I mentioned the word restraint before. I think restraint with music and sound design is something that also gets overlooked or doesn't get, a lot of airtime. Restraint is really important in the music and sound design as well. And with the Babadook, so Jed Kurtzel was the composer for this and did all the music and sound design. And he really did a great job at having that restraint, because I don't know if you noticed, but through a lot of the film, there was actually no sound. There was no music. There was just the real world sounds of what was going on, right? And then in the right moments, we had the sound come in and escalate and then quickly drop off as well. And what that did, at least for me, what it did was it was building that tension in me. I was starting to get, anxious about what was going to happen in the next scene or at the end of that scene. And then to display the disjointed nature of her character at that point, the music built up, and then it stopped right at the right point, and it showed you that, okay, she'd been through, during that time period where the music was building up, she was actually asleep, or she was, passed out, or she was having a flashback, or whatever it was. And then when the music stopped, bang, as soon as it stopped, we knew, okay, that's over. She's back to being awake. She's back to normality, whatever the situation is. But it really just demonstrated that and made it clear to us as an audience that whatever was happening in that scene right now, it's happening. Okay, and now it's stopped. We've moved past that, and we're going into either the next scene or whatever it was that was happening is finished now. And I thought that was really clever. And also, the sound design wasn't over the top. Now, we didn't get the jump scares, which is bloody awesome. I'm so happy about that. But it wasn't over the top as well. It was just very, very menacing in the background. And we can't overlook here the sound of the Babadook. Now, the sound of the Babadook was creepy as hell. And, I would dare anyone who watches this film to come back and tell me that they were not even at least a little bit creeped out by the Babadook and how it sounded and the noises that it made when it was in the house. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Oh my God, let me tell you, like, my girl thought that the kid was annoying when he screamed, but there was a part where the Babadook's you growl thing happened, and she was on her headphones watching some YouTube, and she goes, "What the hell is that?" And it kind of looks up. So I mean, it's the kind of noise that definitely gets your attention. And the best part, like we've been saying, is that this creature is in the shadows, even like even towards the end of the movie, you kind of see what it looks like, but you never really see what it looks like, mostly through that book. And then we, the audience, have to use our imaginations as to what it is, which, by the way, is brilliant. But anyways, the noises that it makes, though, gives you this sense of dread and makes you feel like whatever it looks like, it's terrifying because it's like a creature growl. I mean, honestly, I don't even know how to describe the noise, but it's like feral and it's really just terrifying. And it's kind of cool too because then when you get to the end of the movie and you see how it actually is with the lady and how they end the very end of it, it's kind of funny because then you kind of almost feel like what it was doing was out of self-defense and intimidation rather than, trying to be vicious. And I think that's what makes this movie so brilliant is the fact that it works on so many levels like that. Like the sounds and everything else, they just click. And Jamie Vick says the only reason why I watched the movie was the name was so different, same as me. After it was over, I was glad that I decided to watch it because it was that good. And yeah, that every choice, most movies we seem to review on here, this is one of those movies where every choice that's made in this film, right down to naming the film, because the name's very unique, it catches you're like, what the hell does that mean, right? So you click and you see the synopsis and you're like, oh, this sounds interesting, right? And then you look at the little thing and you're like, horror, psychological drama, and then you start watching it. And it's just everything in this film works. And speaking of works, I'm going to give you guys what the critics thought worked in this film as well as the audience. So I can't actually pull this up, because God, cell phone technology. We're almost there, people. But it is on Redundant Tomatoes. The tomato meters read 98% from the critics, which is really good. It's 236 critics and 39,049 at user reviews at 72%. So there's a difference, but they all do seem to agree that this is a good movie. So some of the top critics here: Charlotte O'Sullivan, that's an Irish name. The Babadook's villain and victims are still running amok in my brain. I think they might be there for some time. Pretty decent review.
That's really good for Redundant Tomatoes. So, I mean, I'm not surprised. I am and I'm not, because Redundant Tomatoes are completely redundant. But I'm not surprised with this film because really, I I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything bad about this movie. There's been lots of theories about, the ending and what it all means and all of that kind of stuff, but I've never heard anything particularly bad said about it. Hello? Am I on my own or have I dropped off? Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, man. Yep.
Oh, okay. There's a glitch between it, but one viewer put a good review where he says it plays like a B movie, it's budgeted like a B movie, but it delivers like an A+ movie. And I think that's a great from just a regular person. That is a great synopsis for this film because in every sense of the word, this would be a B movie. I mean, the budget,
Mm-hmm.
the actors are not really that known except for the one, but most of them aren't even known, and she wouldn't really be known here in the
No.
US except for The Matrix. And when I think of it, I don't think of her right away. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of big name actors. It's not a big production, but yet this small independent film delivers like a big blockbuster. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting too, and most of the ratings are good. I didn't see too many rotten. Now, the biggest thing that people complained about, and I wanted to address this with you because I think this is kind of where the horror community splits, and I've always been on the side of this is a stupid way of looking at it, and why the horror genre devolves to where it goes is that the main complaint about this film is the fact that when people watch it, they have a preconception of what the movie's going to be about,
Mm.
and it's not that way. You know what I mean? They're expecting a big creature, some gory death scenes.
Well, well,
You know?
what I have to say to that is, um, you know, I get expectations and that kind of thing, but a lot of people, to be honest, I'm sorry to all those people out there, if you're one of them, but a lot of people are just dumb, mate. They're just dumb, and they don't understand the clever themes that are woven through a film like this. So, when I say clever, I truly mean that with this film. It is very, very clever, the themes that are woven through this. I mentioned the grief before, so it's, the character of Amelia, the mum, her grief is really manifested in the Babadook, right? But it's not only manifested in the Babadook, it's she actually embraces it at one point. So we see her husband is in the basement and she goes down there and it's a very, very well done scene. But she essentially, if you look at it from a theme point of view, she's actually embracing evil at that point. And it's not just evil in a generic, I'm evil, I'm going to kill everybody sense. It's the evil within herself that she's embracing. So she's kept all these feelings inside for so long, so long, so long, repressed them. And this is the darkness coming out in her. And so physically we see her embracing it. But really, metaphorically, what it's about is her embracing her grief and letting some of that come out. And, one of the things that I really loved about it was when she starts to, I mentioned the scene where she tells the son to go and eat shit before, but you really start to see the shift in her character, and it makes you think in a clever way as well. And it's not an obvious way, but it's just in a clever way. It makes you think to yourself, has the kid actually been misbehaving all this time, or has he just been scared of his mum and the way that she's behaving? Is that what's really been going on? Maybe he actually never was misbehaving. He was actually just scared of everything that she was doing, and he was afraid of her.
Yeah, it really speaks a movie like this. I think that people who think on that higher level, and I'm not saying people who don't are necessarily dumb or whatever else, and I'm not going to be PG in what I say because General Zod never is, but there is something to be said that certain moviegoers like to look at surface level things, but I think this film's brilliance is that it's not a surface level film. It's got so many things where it is a bit of a guessing game. and by the end of it, you do start to question what you've actually been seeing, because essentially it is one of those deals where we are seeing it through their eyes. So we don't know who's actually, when you get to the end and you see what it all starts to mean, you don't know exactly what events are really true and what events are her having this break and she's just seeing it the way she sees it. And it also has the most powerful theme, and I think that resonates with me in any of these kind of movies, is uh, grief and how people deal with that grief. I've had a lot of tragic things happen to me, and so when I see a film like this, I can sort of pick out that message, and I think anyone who's gone through those situations really will, gravitate towards this film because of the fact that, is the monster actually real? Well, yeah, some of it, there's obvious damage and stuff like that, but at the same point, then you kind of get to the point where they can only see it. So it makes you question, is this monster actually real? Or is it just, that is the grief? It was angry. It was causing all these violent things. And then when they both come to terms with it, you know, it being in that basement thing is them kind of acknowledging that it's there, that it's always going to be there, but they've gotten over it and they're able to move on. I mean, there's a lot of complex themes in here, and the brilliant part is it then makes you question the whole thing. Is this creature actually real, or is it just a manifestation of tragedy?
Yeah, yeah, and like all good films, it makes you question yourself at certain points as well. It's like, uh, if I was going through that, how would I deal with it? How would I go through something like that, and what method would I use to deal with it? And you know, you can empathize with the characters because it's set up in the right way, and so you can empathize with the characters. And even when she's being really, really harsh, and she's being really ridiculous to the son, you can even still empathize with her because there's a few scenes, and it's only very quick, really, when you think about it. There's a few scenes where it's just basically showing in each scene how much how much more stress that Amelia is being put under progressively. There's the school for the son, and then there's her work. She's losing shifts, and then her friends aren't wanting to talk to her anymore. And, all of these things just keep happening and happening. And so even when she turns, into a real, bitch towards the son, you actually still empathize with her on a certain level, which I think is also a really good sign of a great film and careful writing and directing. Because, and we talked Joker a little bit before, but to have the audience on the cusp of empathy and loathing for a character at the same time is what I would call brilliant writing, because the audience is given something to look at, given that question for themselves to answer. Where do I sit with this? How do I feel about this happening? And I think that was really, really well done. So we first got that with Samuel, with the kid in the beginning, because he was misbehaving and everything, and so we had certain feelings towards him. And then as the movie progressed and things built and we saw more of the story, we felt different things for different characters throughout it, and it was all just tied together very nicely. And I don't know if you noticed, I just sort of bring this up while I remember it. I don't know if you noticed, but so how the dog dies. Well, she kills the dog, but how the dog dies, and it's buried in the yard. When at the end, very end, when they're getting the worms out of the garden, she looks down for a second, and there's a black rose where the dog was buried. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, I did. And I was like, wow. My whole thing was, who did that? Was it her? Was it uh the son? That was one of those little things, like you said, that makes you really think about everything that's happened in the movie, like that whole questioning everything. And I like what Jamie Vick says here. Unfortunately, people have a tendency to gravitate toward slasher movies because they don't have the patience to wait for the plot to be set up. And this is the problem with the movie industry in general, is that Hollywood churns out all of these reboots, remakes, do-overs because they work for the mass majority, right? A remake of Michael Myers, a remake of Jason and Freddy and stuff like that. They were originally built off of interesting premises. They originally had scary factors, but over the years it's become diluted. But it's the name, right? They've become juggernauts in their field. So Hollywood is going to go towards the safe bet because the mass majority, like Jamie Vick says, they don't want to wait for the setup. They want the payoff right away. And that's, it works for action movies. It works for other genres, but for horror is a lot about patience. A good movie takes patience and time. There was this movie I watched called The Lodge. Never heard of it. I was actually going to watch another movie and I missed the time. And so I looked and I was like, okay, I looked up a quick review just to see, what people were saying. I'm like, And that movie was like, oh my God, the most fucked up psychological, horrific thriller I'd ever seen. And it was one of those movies again, it built, and then the setup paid off. And I think that's a huge, important factor in horror movies. Slashers work, they can be great, but they rely on being over the top and gory. That's their whole thing. Like
Yeah.
the gore is the shock factor. How horrific. Like, I love the movie Hostel, but let's be real, that has a paper thin plot. The thing that makes that movie, paper thin. But the thing that makes that movie work is it did shit no one's ever seen. Like those scenes
Yeah.
are they get you because they're so horrific. So they went to the other end of the spectrum. Whereas movies like this and The Lodge and all those other kind of movies, they play more with your mind, and I think that takes more skill. And to kind
Absolutely.
of cap off with what you were saying, there was a quote by Stan Lee as far as like, and I think it really pertains to this movie, but he says, your heroes are only as great as your villains. He was the one who said that when they asked him in an interview, why your
Yeah.
comics sell so well. And that's really true. The villain can't just be this evil, I'm going to take over the world, because no one can identify with that.
Yeah.
And it's not human. A villain needs to have those human aspects in order to sell it on us. And the best films, the best villains are ones that we're repulsed by, but we understand where they're coming from.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, mate. And, the great thing about this film, I couldn't agree with Stan Lee more, but the great thing about this film is that when you talk about protagonists, antagonists, there's essentially two characters in this film, really. And at different points throughout the film, they're really going between antagonist and protagonist. But if you really boiled it down and really drilled it down to just the one character, so just Amelia, she is both the protagonist and antagonist, because the Babadook is really essentially a manifestation of her own grief. So it's really a one character film. Look, there's two, and I know I'm being a little bit too general here probably, but really the movie itself and the characterizations focus on three characters. It's Amelia, it's the Babadook, which is still Amelia, essentially, and Samuel. So to create such a brilliant film with such tension and real scare factor as well, with three characters, is very, very intense and very clever as well.
Yeah, it really does speak to the great ability of this writer. And I actually did see their second film, and their second film is just as controversial. I read up on it, and some people actually threw up in the audience and walked out. Apparently, it's a historical piece, which was a weird shift, and it's called Nightingale or something.
The
and
Nightingale, yeah.
the Nightingale, and I was like, wow. But this director, she's really good, and she's really particularly good in both these movies with showing the emotions and just the point of view of the character is really her sticking point, and you could see that in what she does. I'm really looking forward to the next thing that she does because she's got some serious talent. And to be honest with you, Hollywood, if you feel like female directors are struggling, why don't you go and get these directors here? Because this just shows. I mean, neither of us probably, when we first saw this film, I'm in the same boat. We had no clue who this director was, none whatsoever. Just watched the movie, right? And then found this person. And, this movie gained, I was reading up on it, it gained more of a following here in the US. So my question is, why couldn't you bring a director like that into our Hollywood? I don't know if I really want that, but you know what I mean? Give her a bigger budget and have her, do a big production. See, this is the problem. Hollywood doesn't want directors like these. They say they want directors like these, but they don't really want a director like this because a director like this is about writing about the human condition, writing things that matter. And Hollywood doesn't want to
Yeah.
talk about things that matter. They want Fast Six. They want,
Is
they,
it 6 or
they
is it
want the big.
16? I think you're right, mate. You're right. You hit the nail on the head. They don't want directors like this. And part of the reason for that is because a director like this has real creative control over what they're doing. And if they didn't, they wouldn't actually do it. Because
Exactly.
of what she wanted to achieve here, she knew exactly what she was going for. And she planned it meticulously and executed it meticulously. Now, if you've got a big studio involved in it, who wants a different outcome, a director like this, of course she would want to be, doing big movies and that sort of thing. But if she's not going to be able to get to do the film that she wants to do, not going to be able to have that creative control, then it's not going to work. The relationship between her, a director like this in Hollywood just wouldn't work. And it works for someone like Christopher Nolan because he's already a huge, huge name. So he can sort of do what he wants. But for someone emerging like Jennifer Kent, she would just come up against issues with that creative control all the time.
And I wanted to bring that up too. It's funny you brought up Christopher Nolan, our Lord and Savior, but but no, because Nolan's an interesting case too, and he did something that was smart, which I think most of these small directors should do. He did the big budgeted film first. Remember, Dark Knight trilogy was sort of his coming out party, and then he kind of played the system, right? And once he got the money, and they say I read an article about it. I meant to bring it up in our late night talks, but they said he's got so much influence. He's probably got more, or he's up there with like Spielberg and Cameron and the rest of them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this, unfortunately, these small directors who are real geniuses, if they just do that one movie, that one big movie that just gets their name out there and the studios want to play ball, then they're able to rustle more control, or they amass enough money to just, fund the project themselves. And then the studios got to take interest because they're like, oh man, this person's like making more money and they're not using one of us. Well, let's just let them do their thing, because that's
Yeah.
what a studio winds up saying. When you get to be like a Nolan, no one's going to tell Nolan what to do. And if he wants to work on something, no one's going to say no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And I think that's the biggest takeaway I got from this is we need more independent directors like this. And we need Hollywood to stop telling us lies because there are great directors out there doing stuff like this. There are female directors who are brilliant doing stuff like this, but they don't want to look. They don't want them there. They just want to say they want them there. Just like the stars don't want them there because they don't want someone overshadowing them, but they say they want them there because it's the cool thing to say.
Yeah,
So
for sure. And look, I, to be honest, well, after I saw this movie, I I was going to give it a 10 out of 10, and then I found out that it had a female director, so I changed it to a 2 out of 10 because no,
Damn,
of
it was
course,
the same for me too.
no, of course not. I absolutely could not care less. But I agree, mate. You know, I just really would love to see more films like this. Don't care who it's by, who's made it, what production company it is. I could care less. But films of this quality, I would just love to see so much more of come out of Hollywood. And look, you know, if Jennifer Kent was able to have creative control and get a bigger budget, imagine what she could do. I mean, there was no effects in this film. All of the effects in it, she created on camera, which means it was shot at the time of creating the film, of actually filming. That means no effects. That means no post-production CGI. It means none of that rubbish. Like, I just can't emphasize that enough. People seem to have forgotten that there was actually a craft of filmmaking and getting effects to occur in camera. And we talked about Nolan, and he's very much the same. He likes to, apart from some CGI that he has to have in there in his films, he absolutely prefers to get everything done in camera. And Jennifer Kent was the same with this. So there was an art form there where people and directors had to make something look a certain way just by using the camera that they had and their skills.
Yeah, film students are taught that too. And it's like once you get into Hollywood, then they just forget what they're taught. But in film school and things like that, because I took a couple of film courses and stuff, yeah, you'd be amazed at the different kind of things you can get just with the camera alone. And that's not factoring in what your story is about and what your actor can do. So, I mean, just learning the craft of the camera themselves and the fact that she wanted to direct it and to shoot it, that shows a lot of talent, because most directors, they don't, they'll have say in what they want, but they won't tinker with it. And, she got like her hands into it. So I think, these are the type of people that we need. And I definitely give this a solid 10. It's a great movie. I think that this is exactly what the horror genre needs, and hopefully we get more directors like this. But anyways, I'm gonna start winding it down. We're at that magical hour mark. So, Stevie, what horror articles do you have coming out about the Hollywood industry? Because there's a lot of horror that comes out of there. Not necessarily monsters, but horrible shit that they're doing.
Yeah. I don't know, mate. With not much happening movie-wise at the moment, I've been just covering a bit more of the news type stuff with entertainment. I mean, you got to take all these things with a grain of salt. But I've been covering the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing a little bit because a lot of that infuriates me about the cancel culture, and that's something that I'm passionate about is anti-cancel culture. So I've been covering that a fair bit, and I'll probably keep covering that for now. So that's what's happening on my channel, and I should have some more videos out this week.
Also, don't forget to check out the Prophets of Geek Culture, which is myself, this man, Mr. Stevie J, Cybernetic Husky, and Pop Culture PB. And as a matter of fact, he came out with a great video talking about his thoughts about the new Batwoman and how she officially checks every box. Check it out. The video is fucking hilarious. I covered it. I think he did it better in his video than we did just talking about it. It's just hilarious and great points that he brings up as far as that whole fiasco goes. Go CW. Please keep fucking up my favorite product. I appreciate it. So anyways, I got some stuff coming out. I'm posting a review today on The Old Guard. If you guys haven't seen it, I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, but I would say that it's definitely on its way to being good. And the way they set it up, it's one of those movies where the sequel will benefit it. And I'll leave it at that because it sets up good themes, but you could tell it needs a second movie. So definitely go and check it out. Give it that viewership. Come on. Charlize Theron's in it. Come on. Like, you gotta watch it. For that suit alone, you have to watch
Yeah.
it. Because my God, Stevie, I was distracted. She's like in this like black leather suit thing with all these guns, and I'm like, Charlize, how old are you? Like, damn, still looking good and
Yeah, I know.
great.
Reminds me
Look,
of Jennifer Aniston aging very well. Um, my last comment will be: watch the Babadook. Watch the Babadook.
yes,
Watch the Babadook.
definitely. And definitely don't say that creepy ass rhyme. Anyways, as always, thank you everybody for coming out and seeing our review. And don't forget that we have the weekend talks on Friday, possibly Saturday. I didn't do one this Saturday because I was a little under the weather, but Friday nights we have our talk with the group. Check out the replay of my latest one if you weren't there or didn't see it. And as always, remember the only rule here in the fandom zone, or a very dark place in your soul, kneel before General Zod.